Hi, today we're just going to do a very short video on how to solve percents. It's something that you probably already know how to do from Math 85, but just in case you need a little review, that's what we'll do. There are a lot of different ways to solve percent problems. I'm sure you learned how to solve these in a prior math class. Whichever way you learn to solve percents, if that's the way you're comfortable with it, that's what you should do. If you have any questions about whether you're solving them correctly, if you're not sure, make sure you stop into my office and ask me. I'm going to show you how I solve percent problems. There's probably 3 or 4 different ways to solve each of these problems, and I don't want to spend time going through all the different ways. So I'm going to show you my favorite way. I encourage you, if you are fairly confident with percents, go ahead and solve the problems on these slides yourself first, and then come back and check your answers. You can pause the video, solve the problem, and then you can start the video again and see if you got it right. So the first type of problem is simply changing a fraction to a percent. So all you have to do to change a fraction to a percent is divide the top number by the bottom number. So 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. After you get that, that means 25 hundredths, and a hundredth is a percent. So 0.25 is the same as 25%. You might recall from math that when you're changing a decimal to a percent, you move the decimal point 2 places to the right to get the answer as a percent. I don't have my calculator on me, so I'm just going to quickly do 2 divided by 15, and it is about 0.1, and then I get 50, so it's about 0.13 repeating. So let's go to 13% for that one. 8/3 is the same as taking 8 divided by 3. 8 divided by 3, well, 8/3 is really 2 2/3, so that'll be 2.6 repeating. So we'll go with 2.7. I'm sorry, it would be it would be 2.66 repeating. So that would be, moving the decimal over 2 places to the right, you'd get 266.6 repeating as a percent, which I think you could probably round to, if you were rounding to sig figs, you'd round it to 300%. But sometimes we want a more accurate answer, so I would suggest rounding that to probably 267%. So you notice this percent is over 100% because this is a fraction that's bigger than 1. Changing percents to decimals is really easy. A percent means out of 100, so 54% is 54 hundredths, which is the same as 0.54. Now, 54% to 0.54 means you're really just moving the decimal point 2 places to the left. So from percent to decimal, you move the decimal point 2 places to the left. You have to think about what percents mean in order to make sure you get these right when you're doing these. So I'm going to skip part B and go to part C. 125% means it's more than 100%. It's more than 1. 1 is 100%. So moving the decimal 2 places to the left is 1.25. And that makes sense. 125% is more than 1. 1 is equal to 100%. 0.5 is the same as a half. That would be 50%. Okay, the next one is a very small percent, and it's going to be an even smaller decimal. I'm going back to part B now. I'll move the decimal point from here 2 places to the left, which gives me 0.00033. Changing decimals to percents, you're going to do the opposite. you're going to move the decimal place 2 places to the right. The reason is 4.125 is the same as 4 and 125 thousandths. Let's do an easier one. 0.18 is the same as 18 hundredths. And percent means out of 100, so 18 100ths is the same as 18%. Moving the decimal 2 places to the right, I get 18%. 4.125, well, that's bigger than 1. We know it's bigger than 100%. In fact, it's 412.5% because you move the decimal 2 places to the right. A very small number for part B, moving the decimal 2 places to the right gives me 0.90%. And I left that 0 on the end here because it wouldn't have been written here if it wasn't significant. For this next group of problems, I like to use an equation to solve this type of problem. You perhaps would prefer to use a ratio if that's how you learned these in math class. I'm going to do most of them using an equation, and then I'll do maybe 1 or 2 also using a ratio, so you can see that method as well. So number 4 says 3 students in a class of 31 got A's on a test. What percent of the students got A's? Here's why I like to set it up as an equation. All I have to do is say, every time I see the word what percent or how many, that's going to be n in my equation. Of is always going to be times in my equation. And then you've got the students. Well, there's 3 students, so that's a number. And then there's an amount of those that got A's. You have 31 students who got A's. So if I'm going to write an equation for this, I'm going to write n times the students. The students, there were, what percent of the students? There's 31 students altogether. What percent of the students, and they're talking the total number of students, so we have to use the 31, got A's? Well, there were 3 students that got A's. So 3 students got A's, 31 students altogether. N times 31 is equal to 3. Okay, what percent is this? Well, to solve it, we have to divide both sides of the equation by 31. We get n equals 3 over 31, and grab my calculator this time, if I can find the on button. 3 divided by 31 gives me 0.9677. I'll round it up to sorry, that's a 0 there. 0.09677. Let's round it up to 97. So 0.097 is our decimal, and we need to write that as a percent. We'll move the decimal 2 to the right. It's going to be 9.7%. Now, if you think about it, that's a logical answer. 3 out of 31 is almost 1 out of 10. If you had 3 students in 30, it would be the same as 1 student in 10, and 1/10 is 10%. 9.7% is pretty close to 10%. Another way to think of this is you always want to take, if you're asked to find a percent, you're always going to be dividing by the total amount. So in this case, the total amount was the 31 students. So we take our 3 students divided by the total amount of 31, and we get our 9.7%. Number 5 is even, I think, easier to set up as an equation. What number is n? The word is means equals. Now, I have to be careful here. When I write 8%, because I have to do a math calculation with it, I either have to write it as a fraction or a decimal. So 8% you could write as 8/100ths, or you could write it as 0.08. Of, just as up here, of meant times, of means times 40. So to find what number is 8% of 40, I take 0.08 times 40, and I get 3.2 for my answer. Okay, let's try another one like that. 80 is, we'll put equals, what percent? Now I'm going to put n there. Of means times, and 200 goes next. So you just follow it word for word, filling in n when it says what number or what percent, filling in a times sign for of, and filling in an equal sign for is. So to solve this one, I'm going to have to divide by 200 to get n alone. So my answer for this one will be 80 divided by 200, and that gives me 0.4, but that's n, that's a decimal number for n. I haven't converted that to a percent yet. I need to move my decimal point 2 places to the right, and I get 40%. And again, that makes sense. And the reason it makes sense is we have 80 out of 200, which is the same as 40 out of 100. And 40 out of 100 is 40%. The next question asks us to find a fraction. What fraction is equivalent to 12%? Well, 12% is 12 100ths. So n is equal to 12 100ths, but we can of course reduce that. If I divide top and bottom of the fraction by 4, I get 3 25ths. I said that I would try a problem using ratios to solve these as well. So students who like to do ratios typically would maybe choose one like number 6. And if it says 80 is what percent of 200, they would set up something very similar to what I wrote right over here, where it has 80 over 200 equals 40 over 100. And really, they simply would say, well, I put the 80 here, and it's out of 200, and I want to know how much is that out of 100. So that's how you could do a ratio, and then you could just solve it using cross multiplication, 80 times 100 divided by 200, or simply knowing that 80 over 200 reduces to 40 over 100. You will see percents in some of your homework, and it's going to pop up throughout the course occasionally. It's a topic that if you need more help with it, you should probably stop in the Math Center. Connie Olson has some great worksheets on percent, and in the Science Tutoring Center as well. I think that they can probably help you with percents and decimals also. But I would definitely recommend, if you have any trouble working percents, just stop in our Math Tutoring Center, say, hey, do you have any handouts, any materials I can use to practice percents? Probably some stuff you can find on your own online too. And please feel free to stop in and see me. That's what I'm here for, to help you. Thanks for listening. Hope you're having a good day.